Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was wheels down at Phoenix Airfield outside McMurdo Station at 3:20 in the afternoon local time when the ski-equipped transport settled onto the snow. The aircraft was a Lockheed C-130 Hercules configured with retractable skis, and the touchdown felt like a long, controlled slide before the pilots brought the power back and let the heavy machine coast to a stop. The loadmaster cracked the paratroop door, and a wave of cold air pushed into the cargo bay, clean and dry and strong enough to sting exposed skin within a breath. Antarctic cold removes heat like a machine, without drama and without mercy. I have worked in polar regions before, both in uniform and as a civilian contractor, but the first moment on the ice always resets your definition of cold. I'm a former Navy hospital corpsman with field communications training. After leaving active duty, I worked support contracts for science and defense programs in high latitudes. This tasking reached me through a short chain of calls and one unmarked digital document. A United States military research outpost in Victoria Land had stopped transmitting at 02:10 in the morning 4 days earlier. There had been no data dumps, no position beacons, and no replies on high frequency, very high frequency, or satellite phone channels since that minute. No emergency signal had been broadcast. The mission request was simple on paper and heavy in implication. Fly light, move quiet, and determine what happened without broadcasting it to the broader community. There were 6 of us. Captain Sarah Kemp of the Air National Guard was our pilot. A woman with many seasons of glacier operations in Greenland and Antarctica. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Cruz, Army engineer, handled power systems, structures, and anything mechanical. Dr. Alice Park, civilian glaciologist, specialized in snow density, ice flow, and subglacial water. Staff Sergeant Leo Ruiz, signals analysis background, would handle erased storage, wiped logs, and any hidden electronics. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Holloway, Navy Intelligence, was our team lead. I was responsible for medical care, communications setup, confined space and gas safety, and cold weather survival protocols. We met the defense liaison in a heated maintenance bay near the skiway. He laid a paper map on a folding table and anchored the corners with steel washers. The target outpost sat on a small rocky hill that pierced the ice sheet, a noon attack northwest of McMurdo Station by a little more than 200 kilometers. The grid reference on the sheet placed it near the Royal Society Range and above the Skelton Glacier. The coordinates on the last clean satellite fix translated to 78 degrees 15 minutes south and 161 degrees 30 minutes east. On record, it supported low-frequency signal propagation research and ice dynamics measurements in coordination with several agencies. Off the record, the liaison used the phrase defense-relevant signal work and left it there. The last healthy transmissions showed nothing unusual. A small housekeeping packet went out over a satellite short-burst channel. Minutes later, a partial burst at 12 MHz on high frequency carried only a few bytes. Then silence. The weather at that hour had been considered visual flight rules by polar standards. Steady wind from the south at about 15 knots. Ambient minus 24 degrees Celsius. Wind chill near minus 38 degrees Celsius. And no large storm cells on satellite imagery. A ground traverse team attempted to reach a fuel cache on that line the following day and turned back when blowing snow and sharp wind-hardened ridges made tracked vehicle progress unsafe. We would fly. We checked our equipment. Our clothing was layered for deep cold with vapor barrier socks inside insulated boots, full-face balaclavas, double-lens anti-fog goggles, and heated glove inserts. Each person carried a compact medical and survival pouch with heat packs, a flexible splint, a tourniquet, a compact hypothermia wrap, and high-calorie emergency rations. For communications, I carried 2 satellite handsets in waterproof cases with external antennas, a portable high-frequency radio with a 100-watt amplifier and a broadband whip, and a very high-frequency handheld for team communications set at low power to limit range. For safety, we had a handheld thermal imager, multi-gas meters for carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and oxygen levels, and a small radiation dosimeter because generator exhaust and enclosed flues can create hazards in unexpected ways. We packed 1 polar tent, an emergency sled, extra fuel, and a rope kit with a pulley-based rescue system. Weapons were limited to 2 5.56mm carbines with cold-weather lubricant and 1 9mm sidearm. There are no large predatory animals here, but military teams sometimes carry for security. Our intention was to avoid ever touching them. Captain Kemp filed an alternate to Williams Field and briefed a direct return if the weather moved faster than forecast. We launched at 4:35 in the afternoon. The flight lasted about 90 minutes in clear air with low, hard sun. The skiway at the outpost appeared as a faint line cut across wind-sculpted snow. Captain Kemp flared gently, kept the slide long, and brought the transport to a stop with room to spare. When the ramp dropped, the world outside was a broad white with carved shapes and no sound until you created some. The compound sat a few hundred meters from the skiway on exposed rock. The modules leveled on steel stanchions anchored to bolts epoxied into the Nunatak. A short, flagged route with bamboo poles led from the skiway to the main door. I studied the area through binoculars before we moved. Thin heat shimmer rose from the generator exhaust cap. Ice crystals feathered on the windward side. That meant at least one generator was operating. The snow in front of the main door showed a rough cut, as if someone had pushed snow away with a boot and then stopped. There were no obvious tracks beyond the normal wind-polished surface. The storage arch stood closed and drifted on the leeward side. We moved in single file. The latch on the outer door was set and pinned from outside in the usual way. Inside the vestibule, warm, dry air hit our faces and fogged any exposed lenses. We cycled the inner door and stepped into a main space that smelled like hot metal and recycled air. The first impression was sound. The subdued bass of a diesel generator through the floor, and the steady rasp of ventilation. In the galley, a small table held 2 food trays with rehydrated meals. Spoons set down in a way that suggested someone had paused and not returned. The liquid had dried to a thin film. A mug with instant coffee had frozen into a coarse ring along the rim. The bunk room was tidy. Parkas hung on hooks. Lockers were partly open. The computer room had 2 workstations with screens active at a login prompt. Green and amber status lights glowed on equipment racks. A power backup unit indicated full charge and normal throughput. In the generator module, we found 2 Caterpillar 9-liter diesel units paired for redundancy. One unit ran at a little over half load. The day tank sat at 3/4. The main belly tank showed a little more than 60%. At those loads and temperatures, they had weeks of fuel. The transfer panel showed no alarms. The carbon monoxide wall monitor read elevated, but below thresholds that would force evacuation. The sort of number that gives headaches if uncorrected over a long sleep, but not an immediate crisis. No one had been tending it. The lab contained spiral-bound paper logbooks that matched standard United States Antarctic program forms. But someone had torn out the first pages quickly, leaving ragged edges and trapped confetti inside the spiral binding. The remaining entries were routine. Temperature readings, a note about a broadband antenna trial, a comment on a borehole camera test that returned no image because of lens frost and interference. The final, complete sentence referenced a shaft inspection scheduled after a tool jam at 0352 on the morning the Outpost stopped transmitting. The last line ended mid-stroke. Cameras mounted under the ceiling showed blinking power lights, but none recorded. I removed one, checked the memory slot, and found it empty. Every camera was the same. The network storage chassis in the rack had all of its drives removed, the empty caddies stacked neatly on top. The satellite communications gateway was powered, but its subscriber identity module socket was empty. Someone had moved fast and followed a priority list. Remove storage, remove identity modules, leave power running. The storage arch, built like a Quonset hut with insulated panels, held drums of aviation turbine fuel for extreme cold, pallets of food, a snowblower, a compact electric winch, hoses, belts, and spare generator parts. The inventory sheet on the wall had a final set of initials from someone with the last name Reams, dated 2 days before the blackout. A sled and a crate marked Borehole Kit B were missing. Everything else looked ordered. At the tunnel entrance, we found a tight metal hatch and a panel marked for confined space entry. A fan purge button still responded. The data logging section of that panel had been physically smashed, the plastic faceplate cracked and the memory card slot torn away. The hatch dogs were set but not locked. We purged the line, clipped our multi-gas meters to our harnesses, and opened the way down. Cold air moved past us in a slow exhale from below. The access tunnel ran with a shallow pitch, plywood decking for footing, aluminum ladder rungs for steeper sections, and light-emitting diode strings zip-tied along the right-hand side to a conduit. The meters stayed clean. We reached a landing with 2 choices. To the left, the survey shaft. To the right, a utility alcove with a heating manifold and a metal locker. The locker stood open and mostly empty. A coil of fiber optic cable and a bag of lens wipes were all that remained. The heat exchanger read warm fluid out at 55 degrees Celsius and return at 42 degrees Celsius within expected values. The system was alive and maintained by heat alone. The survey shaft opened into a circular bore through clear blue ice with steel anchors sunk at intervals and a rope handline. Above the shaft stood a tripod for lowering instruments. A grease pencil note on plywood read that the second shaft camera was offline and to avoid lowering anything until the lens dried. 15 meters down, we could see the top of a small cavity where the ice widened and curved. We did not descend yet. We had not cleared the surface fully. We conducted a second surface sweep methodically. We documented the food trays, the torn logbooks, the removed storage, and the missing subscriber identity modules. We found 2 pairs of cold weather boots near lab benches rather than by the outer door, as if 2 people had changed into indoor shoes and then left the building without swapping back. 3 personal locator beacons sat in a drawer with batteries installed and safety pins still in place. None had been activated. The small field radio for the skiway was set to the local frequency but had no headset attached. A tiny notebook by that radio had approach notes and grooming times. The last entry reading skiway pass 2 at 0110 on the day of silence. The last digit of the line was incomplete, as if the writer had been interrupted. At 7:50 in the evening, Captain Kemp called us on very high-frequency line of sight. The weather margin for a same-day extraction was shrinking with a forecast for ground fog formation. We had a choice: stay and investigate the shaft and whatever lay beyond, or depart and return later with a larger plan. Lieutenant Commander Holloway chose a timed entry with strict safety: 2 down, 2 on the landing, and 2 at the surface, full harness, belay, redundant gas checks, and a no-exception abort rule. Engineer Cruz and I descended first. The metal rungs pulled heat from our gloves even through insulation. At the bottom platform, the ice cavity opened in a scalloped shape polished by water long ago. Metal conduit with fiber and power ran into the darkness. The installed light strings illuminated only the first meters, then stopped. We clipped our lanyards to a safety line and moved forward slowly, checking footing and air. After several meters, the conduit entered a lined tunnel, not bare ice. High-density plastic panels formed walls, seams sealed and riveted. This was a constructed space meant for regular transit. A heavy oval door with a turn handle blocked the way. A patch of tape covered a rectangular hole where a badge reader had once been. Someone had removed it. We turned the handle. A faint hiss of pressure equalization slid across our faces. Lights inside the door were permanent fixtures, not strings. Aluminum diamond plate replaced wood under our feet. The tunnel bent right to another door, then opened into a small gallery with lockers and a bench. A rack for handheld radios was empty. A whiteboard showed a schedule of deep array checks with initials. 2 names repeated: S. Reams and C. Patel. They had initialed multiple checks through the day before silence. The next door led to a rectangular room that did not appear on the public site plan. Server racks lined one wall. A vertical mast penetrated the ceiling with a heavy cable bundle. The racks had cooling fans running and status lights steady. 2 screens showed login prompts. On a table sat a fiber light source tester, a laminated frequency chart labeled in kilohertz, and a torn printout with the words, "Interrupt operations immediately upon receipt of tone. Remove all record. Stand by for extraction." The torn header carried no identifying information. Crews traced power distribution units. Load was modest on most circuits. One cabinet at the back carried an etched but partially polished plate that read, "Low Frequency Sub-Ice Array Interface Number 2. Fiber lines entered it. Coaxial lines exited." The cabinet hummed with a clean, steady note. Dr. Park studied a laminated protocol posted nearby titled Array Service under crevasse conditions. It described lowering a sensor string on a pulley system, lockouts and integrity checks sent over very low-frequency carrier waves. The frequency ranges matched the laminated chart on the table, but not the exact values. Dr. Park looked at the mast again and spoke the plain conclusion. This was an active deep antenna system, not just a measurement set for passive science. We photographed everything without moving a single setting. We did not open sealed devices. We closed every door as we found it on our way back. On the far side of the cavity where the light strings ended, we advanced by headlamp and found a larger chamber formed by older ice movement. No fresh fractures lined the walls, no disaster signs. Scuff marks near the hatch indicated hurried movement by boots, but nothing like a crowd. Topside, a wind shift had started to round off snow ridges. Blowing crystals hazed the air. There was no sign of any vehicle other than ours. We made one last check for a note and found none. In a cramped radio niche off the generator bay, we did find a dedicated high-frequency set with a tuning dial and a laminated card listing a frequency with a hand-drawn tick mark labeled Tone A. The radio was switched off. The dial pointer sat exactly on the mark. We gathered at the galley table and made a short list of facts. The facility had power. All data storage and identity modules had been removed. Logbooks had been partly torn. The underground rooms contained a low-frequency array interface that remained energized. A printed order fragment referenced interrupting operations and removing records upon receipt of a tone, and then standing by for extraction. The skiway had been groomed shortly after 1 in the morning. No emergency devices had been triggered. No departing note, no surface tracks, no visible struggle. The site had not failed. It had been shut down on order. We locked doors, tagged the tunnel hatch, placed a small audio recorder behind a rack to capture structural sounds, transmitted a concise report over satellite phone, and departed before ground fog closed our window. On climb-out, I took oblique photographs of the compound. Nothing moved below. Back at McMurdo Station, we briefed the liaison in a maintenance bay. He listened, took short notes, and asked for a second mission the following day to document the hidden systems carefully and to determine whether any timed events occurred at the outpost. We had 2 hours to rewarm, eat, and adjust gear. We added a rigid pole camera, a separate small generator for independent lighting so we could isolate circuits, a duplicate multi-gas meter, a portable geophone to read vibration through ice and metal, and a read-only data acquisition kit with hardware write blockers and anti-static bags. We launched at 9:40 in the morning under better light. The compound appeared unchanged. Inside, air and surfaces felt identical. The very small details that change when someone has been in a room were absent. The generator loads and fuel levels matched our prior readings within normal drift. We reduced recirculated air carbon monoxide by adjusting vents and verified improved numbers with both meters. Underground, Staff Sergeant Ruiz booted a workstation from an external medium without touching any local storage. He enumerated attached devices and discovered 3 storage bays present but unmounted. Using a hardware blocker, he mounted them read-only and examined system logs. At 2:05 in the morning 4 days earlier, a process called Tone Watch had triggered and called a script named Scrub List. That script enumerated directories, powered down network storage, sent a signal labeled Flag A to a slave device, and then set a control pin high on the low-frequency interface cabinet. 2 minutes later, a command with no user attribution forced a cabinet restart while leaving the rest of the system down. At 2:10, the cabinet came up, engaged the mast line, and all logging stopped. There was no normal shutdown. The record ended like a cut wire. Engineer Cruz and I returned to the ice cavity with the rigid pole camera to explore the unlined side passage beyond the light strings. About 23 meters in, the tunnel bent and widened under a thin lens of clear ice that glowed with daylight. On the floor sat a crate stamped with a code and a year that matched initial outpost construction. A length of webbing lay half buried. No clothing. No tools left in panic. No footprints that could be separated from the general scuff of old work. Dr. Park stepped through the tunnel and read pencil marks on a wall face, small numbers and arrows left by someone tracking change. The marks recorded daily movement of the plastic panels and ice. 3 days before the blackout, the measured creep jumped to 9 millimeters in 1 day, a number too high for a stable tunnel without a stress change. That suggested a nearby void or load shift. The physical hazard did not match a no-notice evacuation because no cracks, spalls, or fresh fractures appeared on any surface. Not far from the main hidden room, Cruz located another sealed hatch recessed in a short dogleg. There was no handle on our side. 4 hex bolts and a gasket held it. Alignment paint on the bolts showed that someone had previously opened and retorqued the hatch and then repainted, but a small crack in one paint line suggested a more recent touch. We photographed the markings, broke the paint gently, and loosened the bolts evenly. The shaft beyond was narrow, with steel rungs and dead air. Gas readings returned normal oxygen and 0 carbon monoxide. We agreed on a short descent only to the first landing. Cruz led. I followed. We counted rungs aloud. At 40 rungs, a small landing held a junction box labeled to match the low-frequency interface cabinet above. Coaxial lines from the cabinet ran down and out. A low electrical hum lived in the metal. Through ice and steel, we felt a repeating vibration like a slow pulse. A few cycles per second, steady and controlled. I placed the thermal imager against the wall and saw a faint warmer streak where a cable ran. We recorded a minute of audio to correlate with any topside events. At the next landing, a small viewing window revealed a sealed chamber containing part of the antenna. A loop element hung on mounts designed to tolerate small ice motion. 2 indicator lights inside the chamber showed power and transmit. Both were on. The server logs above claimed no transmit. That meant the cabinet was taking an input from a path we had not yet seen. We resealed the hatch with the same torque and applied a thin line of marker on each bolt so we could later detect tampering. Back at the racks, Staff Sergeant Ruiz examined an Ethernet card and found a small additional board attached, a field programmable device with a coaxial connector. That board connected the digital network to the low-frequency cabinet in hardware, independent of server permissions. Someone had built a direct control layer that stayed alive when the rest of the system was powered down. We ate a scheduled meal and began our watch cycle. Captain Kemp and Lieutenant Commander Holloway took the first watch. They monitored a receiver tuned to the hand-marked frequency labeled Tone A. At 5:26 in the evening, the receiver emitted a short sequence of tones. The sequence lasted about 2 seconds. A relay clicked in the cabinet downstairs. The vibration pattern in the shaft shifted in time with the tones. Staff Sergeant Ruiz's script added a timestamp. The event repeated 1 minute later, then again 1 minute after that. After the third repetition, the server recorded an entry labeled Tone A Hold, then wrote nothing more. The cabinet drew slightly more current and stabilized. It was a simple, keep-alive command chain from somewhere outside the station. Ground fog and a rising wind closed our flight options. We decided to remain overnight in the outpost, using the storage arch tent as a backup and running carbon monoxide monitors at head height and near the floor. We increased ventilation slightly and verified cleaner air readings. We hand-groomed a small drift off the skiway threshold and marked it with 2 extra wands. We kept lights low and traffic disciplined. Every hour, we checked the generator exhaust temperature, fuel flow, and heating loop. At 11:26 that night, the tone sequence repeated. The relay clicked. The current draw increased for a brief window, then returned to the previous value. By morning, the pattern had repeated twice, each time precisely spaced. The system responded cleanly and without error. Nothing in the public documentation of the outpost referenced an unattended mode for a deep, low-frequency array. The reality under our boots said the system was designed to persist without people, taking orders over a narrow channel that a casual inspection would miss. Permission arrived to perform a limited, non-destructive inspection under the floor of the hidden room. We lifted a panel without disconnecting any power or cables, photographed everything, and replaced it afterward. Under the panel, we found 2 boxes. One was a set of battery packs on a maintenance charge, sized to keep the low-frequency array alive during generator outages. The other was a sealed radio unit with no manufacturer name and a serial number that did not match any standard nomenclature. A thin wire antenna was bonded to the underside of the floor panel. The radio operated in receive-only mode with a very narrow filter and a switch line that led into the small programmable hardware board Staff Sergeant Ruiz had found. That arrangement allowed the array to take external commands even if the server and user interfaces were dark. We closed the panel and logged the time. Conditions improved enough to bring in a second aircraft later that day purely for evidence pickup. Under documented chain of custody procedures, we removed duplicate drive images, the small programmable hardware board, and the sealed radio module. We left the physical array and mast operating because a shutdown without authority was outside our brief and could cause larger problems if the array was part of a scheduled test or a broader network. Before I closed the outpost door, I looked again at the 2 trays on the galley table. Food had been left as if interrupted mid-bite. The marks had hardened into fixed shapes. In this environment, those details would remain indefinitely if undisturbed. There were no notes, There were no messages written on whiteboards beyond technical checklists. A small clock on the wall ticked softly in dry air. At McMurdo Station, we briefed the liaison in a plain room with a large map of the continent on the wall. We presented photographs, timestamps, and clean summaries. We did not draw conclusions beyond what the facts supported. The liaison listened without interrupting. He said that within a week a crew would winterize the above-ground modules and recover non-essential equipment. He did not mention the underground array. When Lieutenant Commander Holloway asked directly about the station personnel, the liaison said their movement was tracked. He did not provide names or destinations. The sentence was present tense and careful. Our team remained on the ice long enough to analyze our recordings in a quiet lab. The short tone sequence matched documented test markers used in long-wave ground testing in the past, but the pattern and duty cycle were modified in a way that suggested a tailored medium. Dr. Park compared our vibration files to ice movement signatures from known subglacial lake drainage events and found no match. The pattern was too precise for a natural event. Engineer crews modeled station failures that could force a no-notice evacuation without general alarms. The scenarios returned few plausible results, and none matched the evidence of careful record removal and orderly power management. The clearest picture was the plain one. A received tone triggered local record scrubbing and an extraction plan, and the human operators complied. On our last off-shift walk to the sea ice edge, Dr. Park stated what the underground hardware implied. The low-frequency system was built to prove that very low-frequency signals could couple through thick glacial ice and subglacial channels for communication or for interference with communication. A simple, durable radio brain had been left in place to take narrowband commands. Removing people is easier than extracting hundreds of meters of cable and a buried loop element. If attention arrived, the human element could leave quickly. The remaining hardware could wait. Weeks later, back in the United States, I received a small cardboard mailer with no return address. Inside was a write-protected memory device and a paper slip with only a date and time written on it. The file on the device contained a 2-second audio clip identical to the tone sequence we recorded at the Outpost. The noise floor matched. The timing matched. No metadata identified the original source. It was either a courtesy confirmation or a reminder that the system we had seen was part of a larger plan, precise and quiet. I never received an official list of the personnel from the Outpost. Through an informal path, I heard that the individuals whose initials we saw on the whiteboard, Reams and Patel, had been reassigned. I did not learn to where. The Outpost appeared in an inventory as winterized and in storage. The underground array appeared nowhere I could see. On my wall map of Victoria Land, there is a small pencil dot at 78 degrees 15 minutes south and 161 degrees 30 minutes east. Under that dot sits a rock outcrop, 2 linked modules, a survey shaft through blue ice, a sealed room with electronics that run without supervision, and a cable bundle that listens for a short command and reacts without hesitation. From a safety perspective, we documented everything that mattered. Evidence of a deliberate data removal, a hardware-level command path that bypassed normal servers, a repeating external tone that kept a buried system alive, and the absence of any signs of physical threat or environmental failure that would drive people out with no time to act. The Outpost had not been shut down by accident or by weather. It had been silenced by instruction, and the instruction came in a form designed to leave few traces. Our report stayed within the lines. It described a powered site, intact structures, clean air numbers after adjustments, and stable generator operations. It included the times that the tone arrived, the current draws observed at the low-frequency cabinet, and the precise locations of hardware not listed on public diagrams. It contained chain of custody records for every component we handled. It did not speculate about policy or purpose. The facts did not require speculation to be clear. I still think about the mechanical details. The aluminum grating under my boots in the lower shaft. The sound of a relay closing in a sealed cabinet after a 2-second tone. The small crack in a line of alignment paint on a bolt head. The steady 75 degrees Celsius pipe temperature in a heating loop. The way the oxygen numbers hovered in a healthy range, and the carbon monoxide values improved with a small change in vent settings. The way the transmitter indicator stayed on no matter what the server interface claimed. These details are not dramatic. They are information that adds up to a clean answer. We did not pry up every panel or break any seals we did not have permission to break. We did not cut any cable. We did not remove any power to test a failure mode that could have endangered later flights or unknown operations. We worked within safety and law, and we left the place the way we found it, with the exception of authorized evidence removals. That is how you move in a place where small mistakes are punished, not by policy, but by temperature and distance. The investigation never turned into a show. It remained a series of objective steps: arrive, secure, measure, document, and depart. The difficult part was not the cold or the logistics. It was the precision of the absence. People had eaten a meal, set down spoons, walked away without the normal closing gestures of a day, removed every piece of recordable media, and left systems designed to endure. Out here, where most actions are openly logged for safety, that kind of silence is a decision, not an accident. When I speak this into a microphone for those who will never step on blue ice, I keep it plain. A United States military research outpost stopped transmitting at 2:10 in the morning. Our small team landed, found power on, found meals set down and hardened, found logbook pages torn, found cameras with empty memory slots, and found an underground system built to listen for a simple command and respond. We recorded the command, documented the response, and brought back what we were allowed to bring back. We left the rest because removing it was never the point. The point had already been made by the people who left when a tone told them to go. On paper, that is the end of the story. In practice, the last scene sits in a sealed room under meters of ice, powered by diesel engines that push heat through loops and keep a hardware brain awake. Somewhere, at scheduled intervals, a short tone is generated and sent. The tone arrives, a relay closes, a small change in current flows, and the system records that it is still in place. It does not need a person to confirm. It does not need a computer in the usual sense. It only needs the tone, and the tone comes when it is time. If you want to know whether I was afraid, I can describe the feeling in practical terms. I monitored the skin on my fingers for blanching when I handled steel. I checked team members' faces for frostnip when we cycled into the wind. I listened for changes in the bass note of a generator that might predict a belt failure. I tested air with a meter before putting my head into any space that could accumulate carbon monoxide. Those are the ways fear is expressed as action in a place like that. The rest is unnecessary. The outpost will be winterized. The fuel will be moved or burned under control. The modules will be secured. The shaft will sit cold and stable, creeping a few millimeters at a time according to stress and temperature, as all tunnels do. The array under the panels will either be extracted by a team I will never meet, or it will be left in place until future plans require it, or until ice shift forces a decision. None of that changes what we saw and recorded in our short window underground. I have been asked what was never meant to be found. The honest answer is simple. What remained in the frozen dark was a stripped set of functions that did not require the usual human and computer layers seen on diagrams. A narrow-band receiver, a small programmable bridge, a low-frequency transmitter, a power source, and a physical medium that carries signal over distances in ways that satellites cannot always guarantee. Those parts can be explained with clear language and basic physics. The unsettling part is not the parts. It is the decision to let those parts keep living after people leave, and to arrange things so that if anyone ever opens the door without authorization, there will be nothing recorded for them to read. I have told this account in full words without abbreviations, with times and military time written in words, with coordinates and temperatures spoken out completely, and with each technical term explained enough for a general audience to follow. That is because this narrative is for voice, and because clarity is respect for your time. If you remember only one practical detail, remember that a 2-second tone can carry orders that take hours to execute, and can move a line of people from a table to an aircraft without a single word spoken on an open channel. We left the outpost intact, we recorded facts, we flew home. In the world of operations, that is completion. In the world of memory, the moment that repeats is the quiet click of a relay in a sealed cabinet under ice at 5:26 in the evening, followed by a change in vibration that you feel through your boots if you stand still. That is the sound of a system acknowledging a command. It is also the sound of the end of what we were sent to find out. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.